So I just wanted to state that before we begin, and I would just like to ask if you're on WebEx, we could hear some feedback. So if you could make sure that you're muted on WebEx. So those of you who are on WebEx, please ensure you're muted, and you can unmute when the moment arises to ask a question. So, okay, we'll begin. So welcome everyone to the Northern Ontario History of Health and Medicine Speaker Series. As I've said in my introduction, my name is Daryl Manitwabi. I am a co-chair of this series with Dr. Jeff Hudson out in Thunder Bay. I'm based here in Sudbury. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce our featured speaker today. The topic is of importance because it's an important social issue, but however, it has significant historical roots in terms of how we came to be where we're at, and that's the direction of this presentation. So our presenter today is Tony Belcourt. Tony was born in the historic Métis community of Lac-Saint-Anne, Alberta. Tony Belcourt's career spans over 50 years of experience and significant achievement in Indigenous affairs, the corporate, government, and not-for-profit sectors. During this period, he founded, led, and served on the boards of numerous local, regional, national, and international Indigenous organizations, including as Vice President and Managing Director of Team Products, Alberta, and Mackenzie, a cooperative of 500 Indigenous artists and craftspeople in those regions from 1968 to 1970, and Vice President, Métis Association of Alberta, 1970 to 71. As founding president of the Native Council of Canada, 1971 to 1974, he was instrumental in creating a national voice for Canada's Métis and non-status Indians, and his efforts were an important contributing factor in the Métis being recognized in the Constitutional Act of 1982 as one of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. And now I'll pass it over to Tony Belcourt.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to turn this thing off. My presentation today, Tony Belcourt, Manitouskai Hin, and Nitsika I'm from, as it was mentioned, Lac-Saint-Anne, Alberta. My presentation is about the rise and fall of Métis-First Nations relations in Ontario. I have a slide presentation, and is that showing? I want to, first of all, dispel some myths that not all Métis communities originate at Red River. I put a poster or a chart up there that I can't. I apologize. We had a bit of technical difficulty this morning getting started because I'm a Mac user and everybody up here, I understand, is into Windows. In my community of Lac-Saint-Anne, this chart is really showing my ancestry. Our community originated when newcomers came to our territory in the late 1700s. There were voyageurs from some Mohawks, French, and others had come along the way. There are in this chart 57 ancestors who are
come on, connect to my head.
Métis, Neyo, Cree, Assiniboine, Sakani, and French. Of that 57, there are just a handful that come from Red River. The rest of the people were born in that area, which is called the Athabasca, northwestern Alberta. The documentation on our people is just amazing. This is a photograph of the man with the beard. His name is Jean-Baptiste Moussois. He was born in 1805. This picture was taken in 1905 when somebody came out there, a photographer, and started taking pictures of our people. In the middle is my great-great-grandmother, his daughter, Constance, and then my great-great-grandfather, Magloire, and in the back are their children. The far left is my grandfather, Jean-Baptiste Belcourt. The documentation, our people have been documented by the church when the priests first came out there in 1846 and started listing births, deaths, marriages, children, and also the script system. In 1885, the government started sending out script commissioners to try to quell the unrest of our people out there after the Battle of Batoche in 1885. The script commissioners did interviews with the people who came forward to obtain scrip, which is a piece of paper that would allow you to exchange it for money, or you could exchange it for land. Some of the scrip was as much as $240. Many of our people had treaty prior to the script commissioners coming along. In our area, the treaty was signed in 1872. And so 13 years later, or 14 years later actually, or 15 years later, when the people actually went forward for scrip, or they had to be discharged from treaty. That documentation I mentioned to you is also, a lot of it was contained in a health study report that was done on our people in the early 1950s. A rare blood in the Laurendale family. And so a lot of that documentation comes from there. These are charts that were made at the time. I wanted to point out that while we have all of these facts from Lac St. Anne, Alberta, similar facts are also available in in Ontario, about the people of Ontario. There is an excellent site called Ontario Métis Facts, where you can see information about the communities and about the people themselves. What happened? How do I get back to my... Yeah. Yeah. I first came to Ottawa in 1971 when we founded the Native Council of Canada, which was an umbrella group to represent the interests of the Métis people and people that were called non-status Indians at the time. These are people that had lost their status because of the provisions in the Indian Act that prevented Indian people who were called Indian women at the time lost their status. You wanted to go to war, you lost your status. There were many other, and all the children were, their status was lost as well. We had the organizations of the prairies, the Métis Prairies organizations that included non-status Indians at the time, formed the Native Council of Canada, and then we expanded. We created new organizations. One was the Ontario Métis and Non-Status Indian Association. That was formed in 1971. We had a lot of success in that 10-year period from 1971 to 1981, when we finally got recognized in the Constitution. Our first goal was coming to Ottawa was to, first of all, let people know in Ottawa that the Métis still existed. because a lot of people probably thought that, well, did think that the Métis had gone the way of the buffalo. So it was a challenge for me just to create an awareness about the Métis people, an awareness of the issues of the non-status Indians, and then eventually Harry Daniels, who had succeeded me as president, made sure that when the Constitution Act was agreed to in 1981, when the negotiations were going on, that the Métis would be included as one of the Aboriginal peoples. Harry knew full well that, well, when Harry was president, he also got an official position of the Department of Justice that Métis, the federal government did not have authority for Métis under the old British North America Act, Section 9124, which set out that the federal government has exclusive jurisdictions for Indians and lands reserved for Indians. That in the Supreme Court in the 30s declared that federal government did have authority for Inuit as well. The Quebec government took them to court on that. But we had an official document saying, no, we were not. There was no authority. So even though the Constitution Act says that the existing Aboriginal rights and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed, if that was all that was left in the Constitution, Harry knew that later on the federal government's position would be, well, that only really includes the First Nations and the Inuit. So he insisted during the negotiations that the Métis be included in. When one of those parliamentary hearings, when the Minister of Justice, Jean Chrétien, firmly said at the hearing, no, we're not going to expand, there's no need to have another clause, Harry said, well, he slammed the fist on the table and he said, well, I mobilize my people. And he walked out, and I think that sent a shudder into the hallowed halls of justice in Ottawa. They called Harry back, and Chrétien said, I talked to the boss, and we've agreed to include the Métis. As I mentioned, we founded the Métis Nation of the Ontario Métis and Non-Status Indian Association. That was an umbrella group, and in the 90s, after, the 80s and 90s, with the Constitution, that umbrella organization, the people in it, were split between those who were Métis, who wanted to pursue their rights as Métis, and others who wanted to deal with the issues concerned with getting back their status. So we split. In 1993, we officially split away from the organization, and then we had our founding delegates conference in 1994. We established a statement of prime purpose, and one of those, we set out the objectives, and I want to read a couple of them, to ensure that Métis exercise their Aboriginal treaty rights and freedoms, and in so doing in a spirit of cooperation with other Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. 13, to establish good relations with all Aboriginal peoples for the pursuit of our common interests and goals. We had outdoor annual assemblies right from the get-go. Well, our first one was in a hotel, but then we held outdoor assemblies. And I had invited elders to come to the assembly to give guidance, spiritual guidance. The first was Wilfred Peltier. And I'm sorry, because of this technical difficulty we had, we're not using my computer, so some things got lost, and one was the photograph of Wilfred. I wish it was there. Wilfred from Wikwemicon. When Wilfred passed, we then had Max Asinui, also from the island, who came to our assemblies, and when he passed, Gordon Wendebents came to our assemblies. I had developed a very good relationship with Gordon, and at one time he said, "You know, there's something missing at your gatherings. You don't have a staff. You don't have an Eagle staff." And so he invited me to his place, and we went to the lodge, and he asked me to open the flap, and there it was, the one that I'm holding, you see, was carved from a single piece of a trunk of a tree that had been split by lightning. And he and his son Chops had taken that tree from the bush, and they didn't know what they were going to do with it. And Gordon, at one point, decided he was going to carve that staff. That's all a single piece. The infinity symbol comes from the knot that was in the tree. I've used my Eagle staff for grand entries at our assemblies and at powwows, and also when we were holding marches on the hill during the days of Idle No More. Our outreach with the Chiefs of Ontario began in earnest in early 1990s. Ontario Regional Chief Charles Fox was the first who was the chief at the time, and he attended our Louis Riel Day ceremonies and came to other gatherings that we had, in addition to our private meetings that we held. And we, at one point, had agreed on establishing a protocol, and we signed that protocol following a Louis Riel Day ceremony at Queen's Park. The guiding principles of the protocol: the parties agree that the implementation of this protocol shall be guided by mutual respect, recognition, and support for the respective rights of First Nations and the Métis Nation. Recognition of government-to-government relationships between these nations, between First Nations and the Métis Nation, and transparent and good faith intentions and discussions. I attended many of the Chiefs' meetings. I was invited as a guest speaker at many of the Chiefs' meetings. We held executive joint meetings with premiers, Ernie Eves, and then Dalton McGuinty. Our road to the nation-to-nation relationship with the Anishinabek Nation also began in the 1990s. And our first, we had meetings with Grand Council Chief Vern Root at the offices at Nipissing. He also then came to our office to visit the registry. And we had a number of private meetings, of course. One of the things that was of interest at the time was our harvesting policy. We were heavily involved in the courts in a case called R.V. Powley concerning harvesting rights. And I wanted to, well, at the time, the Ontario government in particular, but the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, was saying if Métis rights are going to be recognized, then they're going to wipe out the moose population. There's thousands of them. Anybody can become Métis. All you have to do is say you have an ancestor somewhere in the background, and then all of a sudden you'll wipe out the moose population. Well, nonsense. First of all, our people are a people from communities, and we have our own ways of honoring our obligations to Mother Earth. We incorporated those into our harvesting policy. We appointed captains of the hunt to ensure that our people were following this policy. We had a lot of mutual cooperation. The Anishinabek Nation and the Métis Nation in trying to counter these falsehoods that were being presented. Our meetings continued when John Bocage became Grand Council Chief. And then in 1994, we had agreed to form a nation-to-nation relationship. We'd come to the point in the meeting at Nipissing that we were going to do this, and rather than establishing a written protocol, John turned to Gordon Wendements and said, "What is your advice? What do you think we should do to go forward now?" And John said, "We should do this in a traditional way. We will each bring our songs to the drum. We will smoke. We will dance, and we will feast." And I said, "Well, I don't know if I've got a song to bring to the drum." And those of you who had the privilege of ever knowing Gordon, that twinkle in his eyes looks at you and says, "Well, you have one, you just have to find it." It took me a couple of years, and I finally got a phone call from a friend of mine who lived in Helaman, Montana, and he was an historian with really close ties at Turtle Mountain to the Chippewa Métis people there. And he said, "We have an old man here who says he thinks he has the song for you. And we're going to have a thirsty dance. He has one every year. And it'll be determined if that's the song that should be given to you." And he gave me a call to tell me that that had been decided. And I was brought to a ceremony at a wonderful roundhouse at Belcourt, North Dakota, which is in the Turtle Mountain Reservation. It's about 44,000 people at the time who were registered there. Our executive and representatives from the Manitoba Métis Federation, elders, and we brought out the drum, 100 years old at the time, sticks that never touched any other drum. Seated beside me is Elder Francis Eagleheart Cree, who inherited that song, was brought down to him. And his son-in-law on the far right, I think it shows hopefully on the far right, Anthony, oh gosh, that's what you get when you get old. First thing you start doing is forgetting names. Anthony Laframboise. They transferred the song to me. It was an incredible ceremony. The song is about I'm sorry about this interruption. In the early 1800s, the community had gone off on a buffalo hunt, and within the community at Turtle Mountain, there was a specific community at St. Joseph. That was the Mêtis community. And when a runner had come out to tell them that there had been a massacre that had taken place, the Sioux had come and they had a devastation and lost their children. So when they came back, there were no. We lost the slide. There were no bodies of. Well, first of all, when everyone went off to the hunt, it were the able-bodied people, men and women, that went off to the hunt, and left behind were the small children, and and the elders. When they came back, there were people had been massacred, but there were no bodies of any of the children. So Many Eagles Set, who was the leader of the people at that time, of all of the people there, he filled a red glove with tobacco and he sent it around. There had been agreement to have a Nehepwat, Cree alliance. So he called the people together, the Cree, the Assiniboine, the Saulteaux, and the Michif. We're not getting a signal. And a thirsty dance was held at Buffalo Lodge Lake, a short distance from the reservation. And there were said to be 1,500 warriors who were at this thirsty dance. Many lodge poles. As you could imagine, there would have to be many for the number of warriors that were there. The leader, Many Eagles Set, when the center pole, or the main lodge pole, was being raised, he sat on the crux of that lodge pole as it was being raised, and he called the song down from the thunder, the song that was to provide strength for the people as they were entering this thirsty dance and when they were going to go on the march. There's a longer story that I don't have time to get into, but there was never a war of revenge that took place with the Sioux. I have been given that song. It's a sacred song, and brought to the nation-to-nation ceremony that we held at Kettle and Stony Point First Nation in 2005. It was an annual meeting of the Anishinabek Nation. All the chiefs were there. We sang our song. This was all a ceremony. It wasn't done out in the open. It was done in tent. We shared our pipes. I had been gifted a thunder pipe. And then we took part in the powwow, and there was a feast. The unraveling of our relations with First Nations started when the leadership change of the Anishinabek Nation transferred over to, and the Chiefs of Ontario, Isidore Day, who maintained that there were no other people in this territory other than the Anishinaabe people, that there were no Métis communities. He was very adamant about that. My successor, who had wanted to go to Chiefs, been invited to go to Chiefs meetings at one point, was not able to go into the meeting because he was told that if he went in, then Isidore was going to leave. So that meant that they wouldn't do that because of the compact amongst the leaders. And in 2010, the regional chief who succeeded John Bocage, Angus Toulouse, repudiated the protocol. There was an article in the Anishinabek News very recently where the title is it time to renew Métis Nation Ontario relationship agreements? And one of the comments in this article really stands out to me, and it says, they're shrinking our pie of Crown obligations. there has always been in the communities, in some of the communities, not all, an undercurrent of problem about harvesting moose, the moose population. Well, the Métis are not the threat to the moose population. We consider that there's only maybe 1,000 of our people who hunt for moose. And moose is important to those people. I mean, this is traditional food. It's important for their own well-being, physical and mental. But you juxtapose that to the thousands of adult moose tags. When I was president, there were 17,000 adult moose tags that were issued to sports hunters every year, and an unlimited supply of calf tags to sports hunters. You living up here would know all about the people that are coming up with their trailers full of their gear. The other is this question about their shrinking our pie of Crown obligations. I'm going to get to a little later. I've got something else to say about it. Something else that has become a lightning rod in the relationship was Bill C-53, which is an act that was entered into Parliament to give official recognition to the Métis Nation of Ontario for recognition of the right of self-government, so that we could transfer power from federal government. If you're an organization that doesn't have a self-government agreement, a treaty, or a First Nation, and even at that, many people don't have the authority to deliver other than the authority, than what you become a delivery agent for the programs and services that you're getting funded for. So for us, we're the ones who have responsibility for our own child and family care. And if we're going to have funds, and we should, for Métis child and family care, then the laws in terms of how those funds are going to be applied should be made by us and not by somebody else. That's just an example. It's an important thing for the Métis people, but again, it's one of these lightning rods. If you recognize the Métis people, so on and so forth. The situation has been aggravated by the divisions within the Métis National Council, the withdrawal of the Manitoba Métis Federation in 2019 from the MMF, and his move to create a new national organization in Manitoba. There's actually a court case that just started in Toronto this Monday. The Métis National Council is suing the MMF and David and some others for misappropriation of funds and improprieties. While they were there was a scorched earth policy to want to destroy the Métis National Council so that this new one could be organized out there. Another thing that really aggravated the situation was an announcement in 2017 that the Ontario government was going to officially recognize 6 new historic Métis communities. Well, what's new is recognizing them. It's not that these are new communities. Our communities have existed since the 1800s, late 1700s, 1800s. The legitimacy of the Métis Nation of Ontario and its communities have been called into question. There was an Indigenous Identity Fraud Summit last year, co-hosted by the Chiefs of Ontario and the Manitoba Métis Federation. There were a couple of reports that were the basis on which people were alleging this fraud, and they were written by some academics. The analysis of the MNO's recognition of 6 new historic Métis communities final report, and then there was another one. Both of them were commissioned by the Manitoba Métis Federation. Those reports are in a stark violation of the ethics on reports about Métis communities in Ontario. There's a Tri-Council policy statement. The main flaw of their reports is that they never engaged with our contemporary communities or met with our community members. Instead, their focus is on individualized data drawn largely from historic reports. They ignore the fact that there are communities. To be a people is not only self-identification as an individual, it includes community acceptance. So,
Hi, can you please mute on WebEx? We can hear you. If you can please mute on WebEx, and we can continue with the presentation. Thank you.
The attacks and the oppression that has been really poured onto the Métis people of Ontario has consequences. Former Nipissing Chief Scott McLeod during this fraud summit was proudly talking about how he said he went to Métis communities to schools in North Bay to say to the Métis children there, "You're not Métis. There are no Métis here." Can you imagine somebody coming and doing that? Stress is building on our citizens who identify. They're constantly challenged on these boards, these various boards, public service advisory boards, First Nations advisory boards, and at universities. There's a untenured professor who told me he had to take down material he had posted on the university website about Métis people because he had a complaint from the Manitoba Métis Federation, the president did, and they decided to do that. Well, they did put it back up, thank goodness. But to give you an idea, someone called me recently to tell me that when he was applying for a grant, he's a filmmaker, and these funds are set aside for Indigenous people, and when he identified as Métis, eyebrows were raised. I just got a number of emails from various people telling me the kinds of problems they're having. One of them, even at the bank, where she goes, she has an account about the business that she has as a Métis. We have to turn the page. What has been happening just cannot go on. So Isaac Murdoch and I have agreed that we are going to host a painted hand ceremony. We haven't decided exactly where it's going to be or the timing, but it'll be this spring and somewhere on the North Shore. We need to focus not on rights and the things that are dividing us, but the things that are responsibilities of us as Indigenous peoples. We need to focus on our obligations as Indigenous peoples, our obligations to Mother Earth, our obligations to the species, our obligations to each other. We have long-standing relationships and histories together. We need to rekindle those ties. And with that, I'd like to thank university for inviting me to come. Sorry about being a bit disjointed. It's much better if we were sitting around a campfire and I didn't have to lean on these modern tools of technology. I do want to thank the university. Thank you very much, Daryl, for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. And I want to thank everybody for you being here and for those that are listening. By the way, this painted hand ceremony photo that I have up there is from 2015 when we held one at Serpent River. So, merci.
Miigwech, Tony, for an informative presentation. So we're going to now open it up for questions, and we'll begin our questions with. We'll take one question from Thunder Bay, and then we'll take one question from each platform, and we'll continue on. So, is there a question from Thunder Bay? And if so, if you could just ask the question. I'm not able to see you from my vantage point here. Yeah, just see. Okay, we'll take a question on WebEx. I saw a hand raised on WebEx. If you'd like to raise your hand.
Dr. Manitowoc, we did have a question. He did begin. Dr. Erniep.
Yes, thank you. We could see you now.
Thunder Bay.
Jeff. Go ahead.
My question is about Indigenous, if you will, Métis organizations in Ontario, communities that existed before the Métis Nation of Ontario was created. Was there a reconnaissance across the province searching for communities that dated way back and were quite self-conscious and could find the development of the provincial organization an intrusion on their territories? Was there any kind of reconnaissance of that sort?
Yeah, can you repeat your question? We had to raise the volume here to hear you.
Certainly. My concern is about the existence of self-conscious Métis organizations long before you got involved with these activities, with the development of the Métis Nation of Ontario. I'm wondering to what extent there was a reconnaissance across the province to find these communities and develop plans together with them rather than organizing from the top down, as I think did happen.
I think I understand your question. It's not up to governments to find our communities. Our communities exist or they don't. And there is a plethora of history of the existence of our communities. Our people at Sault Ste. Marie, for example, fought in the War of 1812, along with First Nations that are there. And why did they fight? They went because they wanted to protect their lands, protect their own interests. And our people then, at that time, were side by side in their communities. So I think one of the big problems that we've had to deal with or must deal with is the use of the term Métis. And even in my community at Lac St. Anne, Alberta, we never use that word, Métis. That's a relatively new one that has come into, not new, but I mean, from a national point of view. At my community, as I said, we did not use the term Métis. We called ourselves Nehia. That's the way I call myself when I was growing up as a child. And a good friend of mine here is Isaac Murdoch. We've had a lot of discussions about this. along with people who are here, elders. That term is not commonly used here either. But in where I come from, we're called Apitaugosan, which means Cree half-cousins. Isaac told me here the terminology is Anishinabek. I was just down at Shigwenda a while ago, last year, sitting at a kitchen table with a couple of very important people, elder and another person, and they said, no, we don't know anything about Métis people in these communities and this around here. And I said, yeah, but what about the Anishinabek? And she said, oh yeah, we know who they are. We know they live just outside our village here. So the knowledge of the existence of our people exists in the community, at the community level. In 1850, it was the Métis and the First Nations at Sault Ste. Marie that forced the Robinson Treaty to take place. And the record is very clear that the chiefs at that time wanted the Métis chiefs to be included, have their people be included in the treaty. And Robinson said, no, I only have a mandate for the full-bloods, not for the half-breeds. And if full-bloods want to share what we give them, then the half-breeds, the full-bloods, then the half-breeds will be able to share that way. That denial of the recognition of our people in 1850 was the Achilles heel in the court when the court said that we don't have, or when Ontario government said we don't have rights. They charged Steve Powley and many others for hunting without a license. And Steve, rather than doing what traditionally our people did, was go in the bush, they'd hunt, leave the meat in the bush. At night, they'd go, cut it up, bring it back. He put his moose right on top of his truck and drove right through town in front of the MNR. He was charged, and he said he was not going to just go to court, plead guilty, and go back out and do that again. As the judge of the trial said, skulk through the forest like criminals. In that case, we had to prove, we had to counter everything that the Ontario government took as a position. There were no Métis communities in Ontario. There never were. If there are any now, there's no connection between those that might have existed and the ones that are here today. Even if there were communities, they never had rights or exercised them. And even if they did, they were extinguished. Well, the court said, by virtue of the fact that the Métis community clearly recognized, and by the way, all the documentation of the individual ancestry of Steve Powley was submitted and accepted in the court, and of the community. The decision was that the Métis rights there, and Steve Powley in particular, since that community's rights were not included in the treaty, there was never a treaty, then those rights are still existing. There is a law, a long-standing one, the Royal Proclamation of 1763, requiring that the Crown enter into treaties with the Indigenous people before they can enter their territory. Well, that's on the basis of that, and the fact that our people weren't in the treaty, is why our rights are continued to be recognized, that they aren't extinguished. I'm just giving you one example of the detail that exists in our communities. I've showed you a slide with Ontario Métis facts. All you have to do is go to Google Ontario Métis facts, and you'll see all the detail you need to ever satisfy you about the historic existence of our communities, which are principally around the Upper Great Lakes the Abitibi area, and out west, northwestern Ontario, there was, in fact, a half-breed adhesion to Treaty Number 3. So the existence of our communities is not because the government's found them. It's because the history is there, and our people who are here are now finally being able to have the resources and the ability to bring all of that information forward. I hope I've answered your question.
Well, I might add that the chiefs did, in fact, in the Robinson Superior Treaty, recognize the existence of these brothers and sisters of theirs, and I've done research which documents the fact that they received treaty payments through the late 19th century and in the years of the Great War. And so it's on behalf of that community that I was wondering whether in your initial work in developing the Métis Nation of Ontario, you were sensitive to the existence of these communities and these rights. That's it. It's a question about that, not government activity.
There were some payments made to the quote-unquote half-breeds for a period of time, but then in 1885, Ontario government said, why are we paying out so much money? So they hired a guy by the name of James Boron to do a study on that. And he came back and he reported that the commission, the treaty payments were being made to the half-breeds. And he said, surely had Mr. Robinson known of the fecundity and longevity of the half-breeds, he certainly would not have allowed them to be part of the treaty. And then those people were struck from the treaty rolls. Yeah, there were payments made to people, but it's a community. There's a people there with a community. Historic documents showing the lands that all of the families had along the shore. This, again, I ask you to go to Ontario Métis Facts and have a look.
Thank you for the question. I just wanted to remind those who are on WebEx, if you could complete the survey if you haven't done so, and those who are in Thunder Bay as well. We have a survey distributed, and also in Sudbury here, and also if the questions in the chat can be framed in a professional manner, that would be greatly appreciated. The presenter has shared with me is that we cannot have reconciliation without conversation, and because of that, our presenter, Elder Tony Belcourt, has agreed to stay on longer. So we will come to a formal end at 1. For those who need to move on to classes if you're a student. However, if you have time, the speaker will be here longer, and we will keep the WebEx active as well, and we will go on until we run out of time if we come to that. So we're going to go to WebEx now. I see Lynn, you have a question. Go ahead, and you can ask your question.
Sure. Merci. Miigwech, Tony, it's Lynn LaValle here. Nice to see you. I just want to acknowledge and thank you for speaking this truth and bringing up things that most people are not aware of, right? So people aren't aware of the lawsuit, and I'm glad you raised it. I didn't know that they were finally getting to it this week. That's going to be really telling. Do you know what has happened with the expert panel review? I know that the panel review was favorable, but I wonder if the report will ever be public.
In a nutshell, I understand that the expert panel report has been submitted to the Métis National Council, and that is going to be released soon. And nobody knows except the leaders what's in that report. But and I don't know either. I haven't been given any detail, but I've just been told that I'm going to be happy with the report.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Is there a question from Sudbury? Sudbury has a chance to now ask a question.
Can we put this over here and then I'll be the
I don't. Okay, there is no question from Sudbury. We'll go back to Thunder Bay. Is there a question from Thunder Bay? Jeff, we can't see from this end, so if you can do something there to activate things.
Yeah, I'm just at the front, and I've asked whether anybody has a question and or comment, and none at this time. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jeff. We'll go back to WebEx. Is there a question on WebEx? Yes, we have a question. Tashia, go ahead.
Thank you. Merci. Tanche, Tasha Orasi, Anishinabek Nation, for being here today. It's merely a comment, and I think it warrants addressing in this conversation. For those of you who are not from the Métis Nation, or perhaps new to Indigenous relations, when we have an elder, the knowledge keeper such as Tony in the room, coming together to have what are very difficult conversations like these, and to try and forge a way back together in good relations. Institutions such as NASA have a responsibility to also honor themselves, and I would just like to acknowledge that some of the behavior that is happening in the chat is entirely disrespectful and unbefitting how we treat our elders as Indigenous people, regardless of what nation we're from. So I would like to remind all and thank Tony, so brave, and for starting this path forward despite how disrespectful and how some people here aren't honoring those people. Thank you. Always great to hear you speak.
Thank you, Tashia. At this time, we're going to call a formal ending. However, as I mentioned, our speaker is able to stay. If you want to have a chat here in Sudbury or connect through Thunder Bay or on WebEx, we're here to stay as an informal component that will continue on. So I just want to say, by way of closing, Chimigwech Kinwea Gibajayek, Amino Gibzindwek. Thank you all for coming and for listening. And as well, on behalf of the Northern Ontario History of Health and Medicine, I want to thank our speaker, Tony Belcourt, for bringing us a very important conversation, and a conversation that needs to be heard. So, Chimigwech, Tony.
Thank you, Darryl.
And now we'll just we'll hang around, but I recognize you might have a class to go to, or you might need to get back to work, but we'll be here, and we'll hang around and chat. So thank you for coming.
I would also like to mention to everybody that, well, I haven't seen the comments on the chat. I guess I will eventually. But if there are questions or comments people want to post that are worth responding to, then I'd be happy to respond to them. And I'm also available if people want to contact me and have further discussion or have other questions through Facebook Messenger. I respond as I can to most everybody.
So we have a question on WebEx. So Marion, go ahead. You can ask your question.
Okay, thank you for the talk. Very interesting and very informative. I was wondering, at the end of the talk, you were talking about the painted hand ceremony that's planned, and I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about the significance and the meaning of that. And just love to learn more about that.
Simply, it's a gathering of people who will be coming together, bringing their pipes. And this isn't an official kind of meeting. It could never happen anyway, amongst leaders. This is amongst people, people who want to honor our values and our traditions, who want to come together to have discussion and continue to move forward to try to build a relationship that's going to last. As I said, there will be people who are carried by the pipe will be there, of course, elders, and community members, whoever has an interest. We'll be posting that information as to the date, time, and place. And if anybody has any other comments or wants to even indicate to me now that they're interested in coming, then I'd be very interested in hearing from you. Send me a text through Facebook Messenger.
Thank you, Marianne. So we'll take a question from Patricia. So go ahead, Patricia, on WebEx.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Tony, you had mentioned that the shift started when leadership changed over in the Chiefs of Ontario. So how do you, or what would you suggest the pathway forward is if they're still continuing to denounce us, but we still have support from First Nations communities. So it's like even within their structure, they're denouncing us at this Ontario provincial level, but then locally we're still welcomed into communities. So the disconnect is there, and how do we move forward when they always don't agree with their policies or president either?
Can you maybe summarize the question again, Patricia? So we are having trouble following it. Just there's a lot going on here.
So yeah, it's just if Ontario president said level.
You're cutting out. Can you put it in the chat, and we'll come back to that. And I'll just go to. Is there anyone in Thunder Bay who has a question? We can't see you on the screen here, and you can activate things there, Jeff, if there's anyone. If there's no one in Thunder Bay, we'll go with Hank. Hank on WebEx. Go ahead.
Thank you, Tony. A great presentation. This might answer the previous speaker's question, but I apologize for missing the front end of your presentation. But maybe you want to talk about the Nation protocol that we had signed with the First Nations back in 2003, and how that all came about and how we all worked together.
Thanks, Hank. I did include in my presentation the fact that we did have a protocol, Métis Nation of Ontario, Chiefs of Ontario political protocol, and I'll make sure that that's available on my Facebook page as well. But it can be, if you just go to Google, you'll be able to pull it up. It's COO MNO political protocol.
Okay, we'll go to Samantha now. Samantha on WebEx.
Tony, it's me, Samantha. I more wanted to follow up on what Patricia had asked, and I didn't see Patricia put it in the chat yet. But just how we're talking about sort of the Chiefs of Ontario and how some of the chiefs are pushing this narrative that Métis don't exist. But when we're out within our communities and we're having going to powwows and at events with other First Nations people in Ontario and how they're accepting of us, but it seems their leadership isn't. So I think Patricia was kind of asking about how do we move forward as communities if on the community level we're seeing First Nations people accept us, but their chiefs just aren't.
Well, there's been a lot of the negativity has been so heavy and steeped that some people have bought into that. The only thing that we can hope to do is through education be able to turn people's minds around. In many ways, this is racism, and racism is a learned behavior. People who have these racist attitudes towards the Métis people got it from somewhere, and we need to try to turn that around. We can only do that through dialogue and through educational programs. The more we can talk at schools, especially so our children get the information that they need, the better it's going to be for us. But we do attend First Nations events, but First Nations have also been attending our events, and we should make sure we're having more and more outreach to invite them to our rendezvous and to our kitchen parties, and a lot of First Nations people are excellent at playing Métis fiddle tunes. So maybe we should have a fiddle contest between Métis and First Nations. There's a lot of things that we can do, but it's got to be done at the community level. It's certainly not possible, given the current atmosphere or environment, to be done at the political level. It's just got to be done by our people at the local level.
Next, we'll go to Dan on WebEx. So, Dan, you have the next question.
And say, Mr. Belcourt, I would like to I don't have a question, but I would like to thank you for your voice, your knowledge, and sharing your history. It's very unfortunate that we have a lot of this negative pushback from certain groups which deny our existence. I'd like to thank you on the behalf of my family and in my local area for speaking up for us and sharing the truth. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Dan.
Ekwasena, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Dan. Is there, maybe I'll go back to Thunder Bay. Is there any thoughts at Thunder Bay, or you reached the saturation point of your questions? Any questions that have come to mind here in Sudbury, or are you still good? Oh, okay. So we'll go to Abram Benedict on WebEx. Go ahead.
No.
Abram, we lost you. I don't see you here anymore. I think these are all legacy hands. If your hand is up and I haven't called upon you, you can go ahead and ask your question. Are there any more questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, that will conclude our session. So I thank you all for hanging in there. Obviously, this is an important topic, and I just also want to again thank Tony. When I invited Tony for this, at Northern Ontario School of Medicine, we have a social accountability mandate to reflect the peoples who live in Northern Ontario, and Métis peoples are part of the peoples who live in Northern Ontario. So it's important that we reflect those who are here, because it's just part of what we stand for at the medical school here. And also, I just want to again thank Tony. When we first had the conversation, he knows this is an important conversation. It's a difficult one. It's one that some have some challenges with some of the ideas presented. The university is a place to share those ideas, and we might not agree with everything that is said, but we should have the ability to share what our thoughts are on things, and that goes both ways. And so I just want to acknowledge that we've been able to do that. And again, Tony knows this is very important, and he agreed to stay on as long as not as long as is needed, but longer than originally scheduled to answer questions that you may have. So again, thank you all for attending, and thank you for the questions on WebEx. But Tony's going to say some parting words, so I'll pass it over.
Thanks a lot, Daryl. As I mentioned, I am approachable, provided it's with some kind of respect. I'm going to be turning 82 fairly soon, so for those people who feel it's necessary to simply attack, and I was warned by my daughter to, I shouldn't do this because there are people out there that are going to want to come after me. Well, do so all you want. There's an easy way to unfriend you, and I really turn a blind eye and deaf ear to comments that are nothing more than abuse. I am open and available, as I mentioned, for dialogue, for providing more information. The kinds of things that may be said to me, and anger or whatever, they're just going to roll off my back. But stop and think for a moment what that might mean to our children.